let's talk about what's going on, right? We're in the midst of 7 teams still looking for head coaches where, we've got our ideas of what may happen, but the question that I know it's very difficult to answer, but I don't hear us talking about is what should it look like? And so I really want each of you to kind of give me a number. I spent some time last night and I said, well, okay, we've got 32 teams. Do I want 50%? What would that look like? Do I want three quarters? So I want to get a number. Why don't we start with you, Michael? If you could have a number that you think would look right, feel right to you, what would that number be in terms of head coaches?
I'm glad you started with Michael.
Yeah. I was going like this.
Yeah, man, you got that GM experience. You're a
Yeah.
commissioner
Uh,
experience. Like I want to know
yeah. Yeah.
what it could look like from your perspective.
Sure. Well, I think it's hard to pick a target, but I would say if it was balanced, if it somewhat resembled 50%, I think that would be ideal because I think when you look at the large number of players, there should be some representative reflection, I think, of the workforce. And so in that regard, it certainly doesn't represent the number of Black coaches that are in the National Football League. So the pipeline isn't, I don't think, full enough yet to fully get to that number. But I think if we're talking targets, that's where I'd feel comfortable.
Greg, how about you? Your number.
80, 90%. I mean, this is not complicated. If 70% of the players are Black at every major level of the sport, where are the white coaching candidates even coming from? How is it not the overwhelming majority of the candidates came from having played? So you mean to tell me you can run a play, but you can't draw up a play? And you can lead men in a huddle, but you can't lead men with a ball cap on?
Right. Professor Nicole Lavoie, Tucker Center at University of Minnesota. She looked at the NCAA's and she was really trying to test this hypothesis of really the trickle down, right? If you hire diverse candidates in leadership, in that case, it's athletic director, will you see a trickle down? But there's research, and George Cunningham, professor at Texas A&M, talks about this, the glass cliff. And this is, we even when you go back to the Rooney Rule and the early research there on the last hired, first fired, the glass cliff, if you're not familiar, is really that we get hired into struggling teams, right? Then we have shorter tenures, particularly if we have any rough runs. So we're fired right off of these rough runs. And historically, we've been fired with higher winning percentages. And then the last part of it is the white savior. So then that is followed up with the white hire that then comes in and saves the day. So Michael, when you hear this and we're thinking about what actually happened, part of the Bears thing, if in the short tenure you're under the gun, it's pressurized, you don't feel like you can really take the risk to hire even the staff that you may want because you're scrutinized, right? Any of that could be cause to blame you. How does all this kind of work together? From your experience, do you see this glass cliff? Is that a real thing from your perspective? And then, what could be done to maybe mitigate some of that?
Well, I think it starts at this whole, and I think Ken was hitting on it earlier about what the qualifications and how we define qualifications. It's interesting when we talk about Black coaches, almost 99% of them were former players. The vast majority of white coaches were not. And we've tried to define the role of a coach as a CEO, as someone who's a leader, not necessarily who someone comes imbued with all the qualities of a former player. And so part of this process is the way we analyze the job that we think coaches are doing is biased by the fact that so many people, owners and presidents who hire coaches, see Black coaches first as former players. I think Greg even mentioned, about Leslie going to the Bears because we symbolically think of them as athletes on the team moving up to a coaching position as opposed to leaders, CEOs who can manage teams. we then think that they aren't as equipped in those crisis situations to manage them because they're just former players. And so this whole qualifications thing, and then I think the lens in which we see how they operate in that bubble of a bad team with a lot of crisis going on gets the Cully situation where you think, oh no, it's too much for them. And then in a very short leash, you get rid of them. So I think it just starts with this whole concept that they're not CEOs, they're former players. Whereas the Sean McVays, the Sean McDermotts, the Green Bay coach, all of those folks can go in and never play pro football and be seen more as gurus and smart guys and that sort of thing.
There's no, you can give NBA some props in a lot of areas, but it's still not a sense of permanence there. There's still some discomfort that things could change there as well. But football's got this way down a number. Think about it. I mean, for perspective, you got one in the NFL with, and this is not the denominator. You got 60-70% players, and you've got two in MLB with 7-8% players. So who's doing better? I mean, who gets the D and who gets the D minus? I don't know. Who gets the F plus?
And to build on that even further, I mean, if you spend any time online, a lot of Pittsburgh Steelers fans think that Mike Tomlin should have been replaced a few years ago. If Mike Tomlin hadn't had the early success that he did, getting to 2 Super Bowls in the first 5 years of his tenure or whatever it was, he might be gone already. Because he had that early success, I think it's bought him a lot of runway. But if you spend time on Twitter, which unfortunately, I have to, and you look at message boards and things like that, there are Pittsburgh fans who are fine if he left. And he's the first coach in NFL history who has never had a losing season in 15 years, his first 15 years as a head coach. And, I'm going to be incredibly, we all saw Ben Roethlisberger officially retired yesterday. As far as we know, they have no one in the pipeline who's even close to as talented as Ben Roethlisberger. This year's draft is not a good draft for quarterbacks, if you listen to the draft experts. And what happens if he does go 5-12 next year? It's clearly not his fault. Ben Roethlisberger should have retired a year or two ago, really. But when you have a franchise icon like that, you have to kind of let them hang around for as long as they want to. And what happens now? What is the cry going to be like with Steelers fans through no fault of his own if the Steelers go 5-12 next year or worse?
I'm really happy you brought us to that, because that we're going to spend a little bit more time just taking a look at Mike Tomlin as the case study of how to get it right? But before we do that, I want to kind of summarize what we've talked about and even add to what we've done at the Institute. So we've come up with some takeaways. We tried to look at, put a twist on it. We know what the issues are. What might we be able to do? And so our first one was, don't let age serve as a deterrent, right? Because what you see in age is that black head coaches, when they get that opportunity, they're all around this mid-40s age. When you see white coaches, they're at either end. So you get a McVay who's like 30, and you get a Bruce Arians who's in his 70s, I believe, right? So you get this wide gap. We're really all clustered in that one age. And so they get, as Michael said earlier, right? They're the savants. They're seen as the prodigies, right? They're so brilliant. And so by that age part, that's one thing. So don't let that serve as a deterrent. College head coaching experience should be more of a plus. We're not coming, we have some of our black or non-white head coaches, if they've had any college experience, it just doesn't seem to translate into the head coaching thing. Whereas when you're looking at white head coaches, even when you look at the recent fumble with Urban Meyer, they can kind of go back and forth, right? And we see that, we saw it in basketball, Brad Stevens. You can even go back to a Patino. We don't seem to be able to do that back and forth, right? We get stuck and it doesn't seem to matter as much. The equal weight around playing experience. Playing experience seems to be one of these prereqs. We know for whites, less of them, have that as a prereq. but it doesn't seem to matter, right? Again, as you all have addressed, that playing experience could be a negative, and that's not the same when we're looking at it for white. So finding a way to make sure that there's more weight to that. Given this second chance, we see more second chances, but getting even more, right? Tomlin has done this in one chance. And how many people can lead an organization on their first shot and make it work, right? That's just not what typically happens. And Belichick didn't get here. This is not his first head coaching stint. And yet he's going to be a Hall of Famer for sure. We have be cognizant if your organization is one of those that has never hired a coach of color, right? Think about that. And then make sure that that helps to inform, right? And then the last one is do not rely solely on your usual sources. And that's the classic, as Greg keeps alluding to, right? This pool. If you're looking to win, you should be looking for the most talented coaches. And so I think the other stuff that I feel like we've added, and Michael started this with who can actually impact the owners, sounds like the players could potentially do something else. Maybe it's through collective bargaining. Perhaps that's the protection, because individual players suffer a price when they come out and say this, right? Or they do things around this. So thank you for being with us. Kendall.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This was a fantastic discussion. Thank you.